Hi, everyone. You're about to hear my nourishing conversation with Jane Powell about food, community, and what it really takes to build a more resilient future. But before I introduce her, I would love it if you could like and follow me on YouTube, and even if you could leave a review on any of the platforms that you're listening to. It really makes a difference to me as a new podcast, as a solo podcaster. So back to Jane Powell. She's an activist who has spent her career in food as an editor, a teacher, a community activist, and a writer. Her particular focus is public engagement with food and where it comes from as a way to build a more compassionate society. She has a background in Buddhism and is particularly inspired by nonviolent communication. So, one of the things we spoke about a lot was the importance of community and how community might be the thing that's going to save us as we move forward through really troubled times, really coming together to mitigate against disasters. It really got me thinking about my own community, which is the Still Point community, and why that's so vital because right now the world can feel very fractured and fast paced, and we need spaces where we can slow down, meet each other, and make genuine connections, tend to our nervous system. So that is why I have created the Still Point community. And if you feel called to be part of this community, you can follow my links below. But for now, I invite you to settle in, take a breath, and enjoy this really nourishing conversation with Jane. Welcome to the Shattering Place podcast, Jane.
Hello. So pleased to be here.
What is so fascinating to me about the work you do is that you have a unique perspective in that you work in food scarcity. It's a real passion of yours. I know you've done other work, which you'll share, and you practice Buddhism. So you bring to this conversation this combination of qualities that I don't think many of my guests have. I think you're the first guest I have who really is an activist as well as someone who's on that inner path. So that's really fascinating because that's something I'm really passionate about. It's one of the reasons I began this podcast, this idea that we can make a difference in the world, and bringing that combination of qualities, that inner devotional practice or that spiritual discipline, but also marrying that to action in the world. So I'd love to start there, and actually, because I believe your journey through your Buddhist practice has preceded the food scarcity. You could perhaps share with us, what the connection is and how you got started in that.
Okay. Well, I mean, even as a child, I was interested in growing food and and nature. And when I was growing up, it was the ecology movement, and there was the talk about the environmental movement. So that sort of shaped my upbringing. And I had a very Christian upbringing, actually. And it was really important to me to be of service in the world. That was what I was brought up to do, to be useful in the world. And
Mm.
so I was looking for some way that my interest in gardening and food growing, and I was good at science at school, and that was the natural academic path to follow. How could that be something that was actually of service? And I used to wish I wanted to be a doctor, because if I'd been a doctor, that's obvious. You go to hospital, you make people better. But if you are in gardening, how does that work? What are you for? How are you going to help the world by being a gardener? And I wasn't even particularly good. I've never been a particularly good gardener, actually. I just love the idea of it, pottering about in gardens and growing food and talking to people who are better than me at growing
Mm.
food. So all my life, really, I've been looking for ways to be of service in the world in a sort of practical sense, and also in a, you could say, there was always been a religious dimension to it. I don't follow a Christian path anymore. I follow a Buddhist path, but I see a lot of continuity between the two. It's not like a
Sure.
rejection of one and the starting of the other. It's been a continuous path through both.
Mm. Okay, so when did you become involved in food scarcity? Because I believe you also have a background as an educator. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, food scarcity is something that's only really been talked about a lot over the last year or so. It's become a big thing. It was always there in the background. The fact that in Britain, for instance, in the UK, we only grow about half of our food requirements. So all the rest has to be imported, and therefore there's an inbuilt weakness there. And you have climate change, and then you don't have enough of it, and you have cyber attacks, and the delicate global food chains can be disrupted, and that's really come to the forefront over the last year or so in the UK, and I think probably elsewhere. The other countries have been much more prepared than the UK has, but before that, that's like the sort of the negatives, the flip side of the coin. But the positive side of the coin for me has always been about building a better society, having a society which is connected through food with each other and with the earth that we live on. You could call that a religious view, but I've practiced it in secular ways. I don't practice it. I practice it through normal channels, through government projects and charity work and voluntary sector. And it's all about it's been all about, for instance, one of my things that I really loved to do was to organise a school meal, so in a primary school, where the food was supplied locally, and then we would invite the farmers along to the meal, and the food processors, the yogurt maker, the cheese maker, come to the meal and sit down with the children and the parents, and you could sort of see a whole community coming together around food, and how food was the means to do that, the power of the shared meal. So that's really been the thrust of my work for a long time now. And now it's tipping over into genuine urgency about, well, is there actually going to be enough food? And of course, there are people who've been who already know about, in this country, have already working with food insecurity for a long time. People who can't afford to buy enough to eat. So it's by no means new.
No, it isn't. I think food scarcity and famines have been a feature of life on Earth probably for forever, actually. And as you say, the conversation about it now is becoming urgent in our contemporary setting. And there's so much to say about this, because the other part of it you mentioned, and rightly so, is this idea of food as community. Food is something that brings us together. Meals are something that bring us together. And it always has been the case that we would expect a family to share a meal together. That's almost part of the inbuilt definition of what a family is. A family is a group of people who know each other intimately and share meals together. And even extending that to the community, that's my understanding of what community is also about. It's about sharing that food, because food isn't just, what you grow. It also has this phenomenological quality of representing nourishment, doesn't it? It's nourishing, and when you break bread with other people, that's nourishing also in a social way. So there's so much here, and it sounds like as a child, your connection to food was very much about that community piece, the love of growing. It reminds me of the book, The Well-Gardened Mind. You might have come across it, that about the power of gardening for community. And the author talks a lot about different projects of food growing in prisons and mental health settings and so on, and how just the process of growing food together has all these mental health benefits to the nervous system. So that's a part of it, the community part. But the scarcity part, now that's something I know much less about. So not that I'm an expert on gardening or community necessarily, but the scarcity part is something really frightening, because until I met you and started reading some of your articles and gained an understanding of what you do, I knew in my head, okay, we at any moment the supply chain could be disrupted and there could be genuine problems. We all remember COVID, where everyone was queuing for toilet paper and so on. But what is going on? What is the problem with food scarcity? How close are we to a real catastrophe?
Well, I don't exactly know. That's the trouble. We don't know how close we are, but we know we could be. We know it could happen quite quickly. Um, and we know for instance, if there was we know for instance that in the UK there are not warehouses full of food, so that if the supply, we know the whole thing runs on a just in time basis. So I don't know how many days food we've got in the UK to go with, maybe a few days. It's not a lot. And so you only have to interrupt that with a cyber attack, or a severe weather event, flooding, and you instantly get a disruption, or there's a panic like there was with COVID, and people start rushing out and buying loo rolls, and that empties the shelves as well. But we are dependent on these global food chains. We're importing food from far off places like wheat from Ukraine, or sunflower oil from Ukraine, I think it is, and of the vegetables we import from the Mediterranean. Those are areas that are subject to climate change. There's been severe drought in Spain, for instance, and war, of course, in Ukraine. So those are all subject to events that we have no control over, and then we could find ourselves with empty supermarket shelves, with the prospect then of civil unrest, of the breakdown of society. How long actually would we be able to hold things together? So it's a thing of the imagination, and it's very easy not to use our imagination and to carry on exactly as we are. But if we think about it, and there are people thinking about it, then we could be quite close to the brink. I mean, other countries, France, for instance, I think they grow most of their own food. They have enough food within the country, and I assume reasonable sort of balance of nutrients that they could sort something out. And I know Switzerland has 4 months worth of warehoused food stocks and other things like medicines that they've got. So they've got a buffer, but the UK has no buffer. And I mean, one of the things is it's very interesting. Been to a couple of conferences recently, and they were talking about stockpiling in the positive sense. We think of stockpiling as a sort of it's a thing you do if you're a prepper and you think it's going to be the apocalypse and you build a bunker in your back garden. This is all these negative associations, but actually it can be seen as a very positive thing, that those of us who can afford to, and not everybody can, could be stocking up our pantries with long life foods, with a view to sharing it, with a view that when the crunch comes, those of us who've got the resources can get together and start running meals for other people, because bringing people together is going to be the most important thing. So and then at the same time, of course, life appears to be going on as normal, and so it's funny. It's quite difficult to hold those two things together.
And how did you come to learn about the dangerous side of it? Because you came into it from a community awareness point of view, a love of gardening, a love of growing things. What was the point at which, was it a moment or a series of moments when you went, oh, actually, there's a problem here and I'd like to be involved in helping in some way?
Well, one of the things that I've done is to help set up a conference in Wales, the Wales Real Food and Farming Conference, where we get everybody together. And it's all people who are farmers and community gardeners and food bank volunteers and teachers, and nutritionists, people with, the wide range of people with an interest in food and farming. We come together, and mostly it's quite a celebratory thing. But always as part of that, running alongside it, there has been this knowledge. There's been a discussion about food security. Do we need to worry about food security, or don't we? And of course, back, for a long time, we haven't needed to. There's been grain mountains and milk lakes and overproduction in this country. So it certainly wasn't around when I was in my younger days. But of recent years, it's just started to become more of a thing. First of all, it's called food poverty, so that means that people who are on low incomes don't have enough to eat, and that's already a serious problem. Nutrition, it's going to affect public health for a long time. Ultra processed foods as well. But then more recently, the food security thing has just suddenly hit the agenda, and people are starting to listen to it. It's not like it's new, really. It's always been the case, but for instance, after the Second World War, it was very much the case. We had rationing and dig for victory and all that sort of thing. So it's latent in the public psyche, perhaps. And it's just come back again. I think COVID was part of that. That really made people think food and where their food is going to come from. And then things like, I think the war in Ukraine, that gave quite a shock to food prices. Prices have definitely gone up a lot since that war. So that was about 3 years ago now, wasn't it? And now, of course, we've got the Straits of Hormuz blockage. which means that fertilizer is scarce. But that means that, you know, there are farmers who are deciding whether or not to plant crops or not, because you have to buy your fertilizer in advance, and they have to decide if the price has gone up. You know, all these uncertainties are sort of coming, and I think there's just a general mood of uncertainty at the moment with geopolitics. You know, the war in Iran being the biggest thing, and so I think we're all primed more than we were to question the stability of our conventional way of life, that most of us have enjoyed a lot of prosperity for the last, well, since the Second World War, or soon after. You know, it's been an upward trajectory. Standard of living has got better and better, and we expect it to keep rising. And now we're seeing the cracks appear in that story. Young people are not full of optimism. They're far from it. So there's a general questioning of everything, I think. And so we're much more open to the idea that, oh, maybe our food supplies are going to run out. Maybe our energy supplies are going to run out. On what then?
Really, really has made me stop and think. As I said, I didn't really give it a lot of deep thought until we spoke. And when I look at the world as a whole, and I try to project in my mind where we're going in various, you know, catastrophe scenarios, and, you know, all the things that are wrong, it's not the first thing that comes to mind, but that's silly of me. It just reflects the relative prosperity that I've enjoyed about having food and taking that for granted. But thinking about it, when there's war or something, and it can often feel like it's removed from us if we're not in the country where there's experiencing a war. But never before have I experienced this sense of closeness, where the conflicts, wherever they are, they feel so close. There's a conflict in the Middle East, and you can see the petrol prices are just frighteningly high, and then there's affordability issues with that, and then there are delays with that, and all the things you've mentioned. They just hit much closer to home. But still, there's this part of my brain that feels like there is a distance, which is absolutely my privilege. But when you think about food, that's the piece of it that could very quickly become an issue, no matter where the conflict is, no matter what's happening. As you say, it could be a cyber attack, for example. And suddenly what's out there is very much in here, and it's very much in our faces, and the suffering then becomes very real and close to home. So yeah, it's been quite an eye-opening contemplation for me, thinking about it, and then bringing in that community aspect of, really, either there's civil disruption or there's, you know, community collaboration. And I know I've seen in Australia, when we've had bushfires and floods, and in amongst the devastation, there's an incredible rallying together of community, and communities really even drive the disaster relief, you know?
Mm.
Yeah.
I think that's the point, the other side of the coin, and that, so the two strands of the work come, you know, they fit together. That I mean, I find contemplating food security, or the breakdown of our food supply, and not just that actually, but the climate change that means it's harder to grow crops in this country, or that natural, normal sort of food production rhythms are disrupted. So you can see that.
Yes.
And I feel that as a sort of an existential horror, and it and I think the question is, how do we respond to that horror? Do we become horrified and fall apart and panic and put the shutters up and look after number one and make sure we've got what we need? Or do we take that as an opportunity to open and to connect with others, and to find a solidarity, human connection, which, as you say, is really effective. It's a very joyful thing, and obviously I try to choose that. I don't know that I always manage it. Sometimes the horror just feels like it's too strong, but certainly that is the way forward. This is an opportunity for all of those of us who want to be in service to the world, who believe in a collective reality and want to help shape that collective reality, and to contribute to it, not to take from it, but to contribute to it. this is a chance for those of us who have that aspiration, that intention, to meet each other, because none of us can do anything much on our own. Oh, and then of course we can do everything on our own. That's true as well. But we're only, in terms of the practical problems to solve. It's absolutely about collective action, and so this is an opportunity for us to find that, our tribe, our network, and to make those connections. So that's part of what I see this conversation as being about.
Absolutely. It's educational and inspirational and very, very practical, because like I wouldn't have known a lot about it, and I'm sure there are people listening who might have really appreciate this issue. Although I'm seeing more and more community gardens pop up, which is a very good sign, very heartening. But once you are aware of something going on and you understand that there are solutions, there are ways that people can become involved, then there are more possibilities for collaboration. Perhaps then you can share with us some of the things that you're doing around this. I know you work with a project in Gaza, and obviously you organize this food conference. There's work you do in schools.
Yes, it's different things. I mean, I've been a volunteer coordinator at a community garden at the university here for many years, running regular sessions that people can come and share their gardening skills, and but simply be together. The stories that get swapped, the connections that get made as we trundle around wheelbarrows of compost and put seedlings out. It's a shared collaborative space. It's not commercial. There's no hierarchy. We're just perhaps a hierarchy of knowledge and expertise, but we're here as humans on the land together. And I also volunteer at a community meal that's held in a local church, and we cook a meal for about 30 people maybe. So I do that very occasionally, but there's a really impressive band of people there who are there every Thursday, and they you can see how it energizes them. And then I've always had an interest in the sort of international connection. So a group of us are setting up a collaboration with the projects in Gaza. There's some very impressive work going on in Gaza to do with food distribution, kitchens, and also a group there that's actually growing food. The Arab League for the Protection of Nature are running projects to supply farmers and gardeners with equipment and expertise, and yes, which is so inspiring, that can be happening in the wreckage of Gaza, because it was a very productive area once, and most of its farmland has been destroyed, but there is always something left, and I think it's very inspiring that people will just keep going, and I think, well, that might be us one day, and I want to have learned something from that so that we can use that here. And another link that's just come about is with Uganda. So a couple of weeks ago, it was so wonderful to be in a classroom with a group of children from near where I live, and a group of children in a primary school in Uganda, and it's in a refugee camp called Nakivale, and the children were just asking each other about their school gardens. How do you water your garden? What crops do you grow? What wildlife comes into your garden? Do you have giraffes? This sort of thing. They don't have giraffes, by the way. But these young people were just comparing notes about how they garden together. But it was much more than simply swapping information, obviously. It was so moving to hear these young children, these children from Uganda who come from refugee camps. That's their background. They've had difficult lives, and of course the children in this country have much, it's a very different sort of existence. But the curiosity, the validation, the sort of sense of global community, and I was, the children at this end were completely, totally paying attention. They were enthralled, looking at this Zoom screen and a classroom in Uganda. So I think as we need to find new ways of living in here, like in the UK or in the West, perhaps, I think we're afraid of losing things. We're afraid of losing our wealth and having to go back to awful basics, but we can see people who are in much worse positions, and see how actually the human spirit keeps going. People do keep coming together. They look out for each other. They still plant, they still plant seeds. They still grow food. They still do what they can. And it's that power of community that I think we really need to lean into as our
Mm,
government here increasingly not quite incapable, but it's too big a project for a short-term electoral cycle. That
mm,
this work needs to be done by the people who live in the area, who have that long-term commitment. They're going to be here 20, 30, 40 years. They're not going anywhere.
mm.
Then you build trust and relationships, and then you can think in that long-term way.
Mm. I mean, really, we should all be growing our own food. It seems to me, at some level, we should all have had the experience of planting and gardening and understand where our food comes from. And we were so divorced from that cycle of growing and planting and what it means to nurture something through a life cycle and consume food that you've grown yourself. I think there's so much value in that, and it's so great to see so many schools doing it. And I wish everyone could do this. It seems to me also that the beauty of the project you're doing with Uganda and having children, witness each other and communicate is, you're dropping that seed, right? In the minds of both of these children. And I'm sure that these children growing up in Wales will grow up and they'll remember that they also need to have food, that it comes from somewhere, that their children in Uganda in this refugee camp who grow their own food. And it will just be something, in the back of their minds, this experience they had, maybe just one day when they were at school for one moment of their life. But nevertheless, there's that seed that's been planted in their mind. And when and if things get to a certain state, that will be remembered, surely. So I think education is a huge piece of it, particularly when they're children.
Yes, of course, you're shaping character at that age, and you're teaching. It's about values. It's about having for children to grow up with a sense of themselves as citizens.
Mm,
Because so much of school can go in so many different directions, can't it? It can be a very negative experience for many children. It can be very crushing. It can be experience of failure. And if it's an experience of success, then that can be a sort of competitive success. Oh, I came top in
yes.
maths, and I won the prize for this. And that's not a very good basis for long-term mental health, to think that you were good at school, because one day you leave school and then what? So while
I
children are at
agree.
school, they need to have an experience of what it's like to be in community with other children. I mean, in fact, another thing that project I've been volunteering recently for is a peace education project. And we have the children sit in a circle. So nothing to do with food this time, but we have the children sit in a circle, and they learn how to listen to each other. They learn how to value each other. They learn how to understand their feelings a bit better, and how to create good feelings. So we'll play games, and we'll get the quieter children have a voice if they want to speak, and we model a way of being which is not about hierarchy and domination. And it's really important that the teacher actually sits with the children. So there are adults there, and obviously the adults have a certain responsibility that the children don't have, because we're adults and they're children. But in terms of who has a voice, we make it as even as we can. And I think gardening is an extension of that, because it brings it into a practical sphere, or art, cookery. I mean, it could be art as well, isn't it? I wouldn't want to say everybody has to do gardening. There are other things. It's just gardening is a particularly significant one, I think, because of the connection with the natural world. Like, you don't know what's going to happen when you grow your crops, when you put your seeds in the ground. The slugs could eat them all next week. So, you have to, there's real risk, there's real jeopardy in gardening. And then there's wonderful rewards. You come along in the autumn and there's a whole load of drying beans, and you can, spend half an hour shelling them all, and then you've got a handful of beans, and it's Jack and the Beanstalk again. And it's a miracle. There are miracles in gardening. So it teaches you such a lot about the cycles of nature, about co-creation, because you don't have complete control over it, or even very much control. It teaches you about sharing, because the birds come and eat your red currants, but you want to have birds have to live as well. It teaches
Mm.
you about the cycle of life, the composting. I just love composting. It's such a metaphor for all our sort of negativity and waste and things that we wish we'd never done. You know, and you can put all of that on the compost heap, and you turn it every now and then, and the bacteria and the fungi work on it, and then you end up with this rich soil that's going to grow new things. And it's such a metaphor for human life that
Absolutely.
can be redeemed. We can compost us, we can compost everything.
Mm. I absolutely agree. And it takes the food you eat and you turns it into this connection with life in a way, and life in the natural world, but that's really real and grounded in reality. So often you go to a supermarket and I can look at the food on display and think of it as a consumer product and have my list of things I need for whatever my meal and my family's needs are. And it's you're just ticking things off a list and you're grabbing three of this and four of that. And there's such a disconnection from where that came from and who grew it. And you never will view that supermarket aisle the same way again when you've gone to the trouble of planting and growing. So I think it's very healthy. And I love everything you said about children and learning, and that's absolutely true. I sent my children to a quite alternative school in Sydney where they could grow things and climb trees and be barefoot, and they did sit in circles and have that honest emotional conversation and reflection. And I think that they're better humans for it. And this is really what you're speaking about, really is a vision of what life could be on this planet. You know, it takes us into a really aspirational space. I think it's important to contemplate, especially in the context of this podcast, which emerged out of a really considering where we're going as a humanity, as a collective. And these practices, this tending to children, tending to our emotional lives, tending to the environment, tending to the soil, tending to our compost, is part of a version of reality that I certainly would love to see more of and grow into.
And it's something that we simply practice, at whatever level we're called to, and whatever level is realistic for us. But it's something, we can all do it if we're drinking a cup of coffee. Just spare a moment. I don't always do this, but spare a moment to think, well, somebody grew that coffee in some very far away land, because they certainly don't grow
Yes.
coffee in the UK, South America, or perhaps it was Kenya or Ethiopia. So somebody worked for that coffee, and probably, and they had children to raise, and so, and rain fell, and all this happened, all over that way over there, and we can just take a moment to acknowledge that, and that's all it really. That's where it starts. Is simply awareness practice. And as I say, I very often don't do this, but the religious practice of saying grace before a meal, which I think is a lovely thing to do. It just reminds us. It wakes us up a little bit. And put it in Buddhist terms, it's about interconnectedness. That we are all, you can't draw a hard, sharp line and say, right, this is me, and I'm going to do this, this, and this, and that's them, and because we are completely interdependent. I mean, none of us can grow our own food. Even if we're a farmer, we might be growing some of our own food. We're not going to be growing all of it, and we can't
No.
also provide our own medical care and our own education and this and that and shelter and energy. It's impossible. I mean, there's a few people who will try and live off grid, and that's a worthwhile project, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we are a very collective species. We're a very social species, and our lives depend on other people doing so many things for us. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't mend my car. I don't even know how it works. I just know that it does, and it gets me places. So we take so much on trust,
Mm.
and it's about recognizing that, and the health of the whole is what supports the health of the individual, and vice versa. There's this to and fro between the individual and the collective, and we are responsible for ourselves as individuals, and we're responsible for the collective that we're in, and we live in a society that has got a sort of an unhealthy understanding, a very incomplete understanding of that, and it thinks that it expects the individual actually to continuously optimize their lives and get as much as they possibly can in a very rational way. And if people fail, well, that's because they weren't trying hard enough, or they didn't have the right information, and we'll just give them more information, and then they will eat 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. We just need to give them more posters to look at, and that'll make them do it. But of course, it doesn't work like that. It's mysterious how it works, actually. I mean, I'm not here to tell anybody how it does work. I just know that it doesn't work like that. It works in a much more mysterious and embodied way. But the point I wanted to make really is that this is, that our participation in collective life is mysterious. It isn't what we're told it is. It isn't just about money and exchange and knowledge and information. It's much more about a lived experience that we're all in.
As you're speaking about the meaning of the balancing the individual needs with the collective and being mindful that we can't do everything ourselves, it just brings me back to this community aspect of food. And just my reflection is that really when we're talking about whatever it is, food scarcity or environmental degradation or any water, housing insecurity, lack of access to water, whatever it is that we're talking about in terms of some of the pressing problems, it's really, no matter what we do or no matter how we're involved, it's finding our way back to collective responses to crisis, and through that back to community, back to togetherness, back to interaction. And that's what I think we've been missing. I'm not trying to make light of very intensely catastrophic situations which put people at grave risk. However, it seems to me that there is something very necessary about remembering that we are one humanity and that we are part of a larger collective. It seems to be very necessary that we come back together. I think that's something we've really lost, particularly in the Western world where we live. Individualism has been so big, but I think even in cultures which we would normally think of Eastern culture as more collectively minded, I think modernity in those cultures has even there eroded this collective sensibility. And perhaps this is what we need. Perhaps this is what it's about. It's finding solutions together.
The challenge of working together is to find a bigger story that we're all in. Not, my story is this and your story is that and their story is that, and it's competing. We want people to join our tribe. We need to find something that is really overarching, and religion used to do that, with limitations, but it did at least do that. People shared, they were living, felt that they were part of a shared reality, and so we need to find something like that again. But we can't. I don't think we can go back to how it was. Christianity in this country, for instance, for most people, it's not. Or the traditional form of it is not going to work. People left for a good reason. They grew out of it. They're not going to go back to it like that.
True. Yeah.
And what I'm noticing actually is for the food has the potential to do that. It acts as a sort of mysterious connector that, you stand in a community kitchen and you peel the potatoes and you cook them and then somebody eats them, and then you have that it gives you an experience which is beyond words, and it's experiences we need, because that gives us the confidence to believe in collective reality. But another one that's very interesting, that's coming up a lot at the moment, is about our relationship with nature, and the idea that nature has rights. There's a whole sort of rights of nature movement and lots of activity there, and it's things like giving the river the legal rights of a person. I mean, that happened in New Zealand and somewhere in Central America. It's happening in the UK. I'm sure it's happening in a lot of places where people are starting to see a river as if it were a living thing. Well, it is a living thing in a sense, and all the creatures that live in it also being living things, and that humans are part of this wider community. So it's not just about humans coming together. It's about all of what you would once have been called creation, all of the biosphere, all of the living world coming together. And so the food thing is just a piece within that bigger piece, because there's oxygen and water and soil and involved as well. So there's some very interesting work going on at the moment with nature on the board, for instance, when a board of trustees of a charity or a government organisation might have somebody sitting on that board who represents nature. And that's something that's started to happen. People are experimenting with that.
I was
Um,
not aware of that. I will definitely
yeah,
look that up. Yeah.
yeah. I wish I'd researched it a bit more before coming to this meeting. But if you look up nature on the board, there are podcasts about it. And it's about shifting. Obviously, nature can't literally quite sit on the board, but somebody who can do their best approximation of representing the interests of nature can do that, and it just shifts the awareness. It's a place marker, shifts the awareness, and then there's things like I haven't done this myself, but Joanna Macy's work, The Council of Beings, where you take on, you wear a mask, I think, and you become the beetle, that's whose habitat's about to be swept away for a new road, and you that sort of thing. So those imaginative exercises, and of course, this is where the arts are so essential. We've become very very much enthralled to a very scientific, positivist, materialist worldview that has produced traumatic, obviously great benefits, but it has also it created a lot of problems because it's a very narrow bandwidth to be looking at the world through. So we need the
Yes.
arts for making these greater stories and teaching us, allowing us to giving us the confidence in our true nature that allows us to let go of this sort of competitive individual sense of self that our society
Yeah.
has, capitalism, what do you want to call it, modernity. It's not just capitalism, it's modernity. It's the whole sort of
Modernity, yes.
whole
It's the
thing.
whole thing.
It's the whole
Yeah.
thing. Um,
Mm.
that it's created a certain sort of person, and we need to connect with this larger sense of who we are. This sort of sense of our true nature that goes beyond birth and death, goes beyond you and me. This is something much bigger that we're all in.
Yes. Yes. I interviewed someone recently Edward Tick, who is a psychotherapist who works with war veterans with the warrior archetype, and he leads retreats and so on, and in Greece. And he was saying that the word apocalypse is a Greek word, and actually it means to reveal something, and that he likes to say, we are in the apocalypse, and what it's doing is it's not the end, but it's the revelation, it's the revealing of what's kind of been festering there beneath the surface for years. And with this conversation, I'm just really reflecting on how in these times of revelation where we're seeing how we've just gotten so away from who we are and from the earth and from the source of our food and so on. It's really showing us the value of coming back together. So again, pushing us to the brink, and in that response to disaster, having to collaborate, and that's a good
Mm,
thing.
it is a very good thing, and there's a risk to it as well. We don't know how it's going to go or what it's
Mm.
going to look like afterwards. I mean, we don't know where we're going. We don't have a plan, and if we did have a plan, it would probably be not. It would be grounded in where we are now, and that it's going to be different. So we can't have that sort of a plan. Um, we must try to do what we can to provide for the future, because we have that
Mm.
responsibility to future generations to provide for them. So we must do what we think is the best thing, but we can only give it our best shot, and then we have to let go of it because it's way beyond our what any of us can hold.
Yeah.
Certainly, what most of us can hold.
Yeah.
And so there's this total sort of sense of like the rug's being pulled out from underneath us, and we're either going to swim or we're going to sink, which is mixing the metaphors rather wildly. But yes, there
Mm.
is this sense of we just don't know. I think we need to be able to tolerate that not knowing, and to be willing to let go of everything, because it's probably going to get taken from us, and certainly when we die it'll get taken from us anyway. So the consciousness of death is really important here, but in the sense of finding joy in conversations like this. We look at the horror, but we can also see the promise that we can let go of a way of being that didn't really make us happy, wasn't quite in true.
Yeah. And this is really important, and such a confronting thing to think about. But I agree with you. I think we absolutely must confront the possibility of things working or things not working. And I'm curious how you navigate that. So I'm always asking others, how do you find that line between being aware of the things that could go wrong, the things that are going wrong, the horrors of the world, and and then on the other side of that, the hope that there's something in the collapse which provides fertile ground, dare I say, compost for something new to be born. How do you find that, Jane?
I find it difficult. It feels like it's got much more intense, and like I feel like I'm breaking up sometimes. I feel like I'm not holding, like I seem to be different people, and so I do a lot of I meditate. I've also find some very helpful sort of techniques through the meditation or through Buddhism, but they're also in secular practice, to do with recognizing the parts of ourselves that have different ideas
Yes.
about how things are,
Mm,
and
yeah.
I notice that I feel like I am being broken up into bits, and and I'm just having to learn to keep going through that process, and I find it I do find it actually quite scary, quite and yet I find, well, here actually my life keeps going from day to day, and so there's something there I can trust.
Mm.
I find that I get lots of synchronicities, moments of encouragement, and I think, oh, even though this feels awful, maybe I am actually on the right track, and my task is to hold this discomfort, and that and in the trust that something creative will come to it. And I find, you know, faith, staying faithful to the, you know, practicing everyday acts of kindness and practical things, like I'm going to go to the community garden in a minute, and I'm going to, water the polytunnel and do a bit of weeding, and I'm just going to it's the word expression I like is showing up. We just show up
Yes.
in life,
Show up.
and
Yeah.
the best that we can. And sometimes I can't, actually. Sometimes I feel so overcome, I just sort of sit at home and I think I can't do anything. But then I sit with that, it passes, and I find some opportunities. So it's like somebody reaches out a hand to me, maybe not knowing what they're doing even, but life reaches out a hand and says, oh, come on, just do this next bit, and then, and then you meet somebody, and I'll meet somebody and I'll read something, and something will click, and I'll think, yes, I am on the right track, and I'm just going to keep showing up and keep doing what I think is the best. And but it's so important to have companions on this path, that we have people we can share this process with, because it is a scary to watch something that you've grown up with sort of starting to crumble, is
It is
deeply
terrifying.
deeply
Yeah.
terrifying. And I can't actually, I also give myself time off. I have times when I think I'm just not going to watch the news, I'm not going to think about any of this stuff, I'm just going to have a nice cup of tea and a biscuit and read a book, and just you know care for myself, because actually I can't, it's too much to take in.
It is. It is a lot. I mean, even just today, in the middle of the day, I went to the gym, and I don't normally watch TV. I'm quite selective, but they have these big TVs in the gym, and they had news stories about the earthquake in Venezuela, and you can't not see it, and then feel it. And of course, like, to actually be there is a whole other reality, and that is real. I think it's important to feel it, though. I think it's important to take a moment and feel the horror and feel the grief, because it's real. It's happening. And allow that to move through us as anything else would move through us. And then, as you say, carry on, put one foot in front of the other. And I also think it's kind of slightly related, but we're each only one individual, and we're not expected to, we're not like Atlas holding the whole weight of the world on our back. We can think that we are. Sometimes it can feel like that, but we're not. I think we must remind ourselves that what we can do as one individual is enough. One kindness you show someone in that critical moment can have a ripple effect that we can't perceive with our little human monkey minds. Which isn't to say that we shouldn't, if we feel called to become involved in a charitable project, of course we should, because we should always listen to that inner sense that there's something I want to do, there's something I can do, this is the right fit for me, as you're doing in your work, if we feel that call. But then equally, as I've discussed with many other guests, we also can have those days where we're feeling overwhelmed and we're just putting one foot in front of the other. The best we can do is water the plant.
Yeah. I think it's a wonderful quote. I don't know where it came from. Something that love tells me I am everything. Wisdom tells me I'm nothing. And I think
Ah,
there's that sort of constant shift between one and the other. So love tells me, I'm this amazing person, gosh, and I did this and I did that, and I could do that, I could really do everything because I could do so much. And then there's a grandiosity in that. And
yeah.
I've encountered that so many times, and I get knocked back, and it's life says, yes, Jane, you are everything. You're really nice little, you're really great. But actually stop now. You've done your bit. Don't sit down. There's other people got things to do, and you didn't. And then I realised that yes, I sort of inflated my sense of who I was, and it wasn't wrong either. It wasn't wrong to do that. We need to venture out and be the greatest that we can, because that's what it is to be human. We want to do that. We want to grow and flourish and achieve, and that's a really natural thing. All children, children
Mm.
that we encourage, and then it needs to be received somehow. And then, okay, little Jane, well done, very good. Now you go and sit down and let the other children have a go. And there's that sort of constant to and fro, and then the thing is to keep going after that setback. Oh, I overstretched. I was too grandiose. I had too much of a big sense of myself. I had too much self-importance, and now I've been cut back to size. And then the temptation is to think, I've failed. I did it wrong, and that's also a mistake, because we have to find somewhere in the middle. It's like a position of being quite ordinary and just showing up and accepting my ordinariness, because I'm very ordinary.
Yes. I,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Mm.
love everything you're saying. I so relate to it. Even lately, I often am on this productivity kind of cycle where I'm very productive. I might write a lot on Substack, and then I might just want to retreat from the world. And I had a weekend like that recently where I really just I can't remember ever spending so much time just sitting in one place, looking at the trees, looking at nature. We've just moved house, and there's a really lovely garden in the back, and it's got a covered veranda, and I'm now looking after my daughter's cat, and she's a big lap cat. She just wants cuddles all the time, and I've just found myself sitting a lot with the cat on my lap, just not even having the impulse to look at my phone or read a book, and just literally for hours. I think off and on I'd go get a cup of coffee or tea, but mostly just taking in the environment and feeling like, oh gosh, I just want to disappear and just be alone and do nothing and be nobody. And then the next day there's something I have to do, and that seems to be my flow. I can't keep up with the constant productivity, and it's really caused me to reflect really what is important to do. How can we be of service, like we don't have to be doing things all the time. Sometimes there's a need to do nothing, and then as part of that, this idea of living somehow in the flow of something greater and just surrendering to that. And she's saying it's actually not my responsibility with my little ego mind to decide what I need to do today in this moment or tomorrow. I can just sort of be floating on the river of life. And when something appears in my mind or my environment, okay, now I will make this phone call or do this thing, but just generally let life take me. And that's a really new orientation for me. And I'm still learning how to be in that flow. It's very much almost feels like a really radical thing to do in our
Mm.
age, right? It feels
I,
quite radical to live in that way. Yeah.
it is. I mean, I was very struck by that. I think you mentioned it on your podcast. Like permission to step out of productivity culture. It's not for all of us, but certainly for me, it's been the water I've swum in.
Yes.
Am I achieving? Am I recognized for achieving? Am I in the top table of movers and shakers that get asked things? Am I you know am I active and busy and successful, and then getting really upset when I'm not? And if you can, if I find it helpful just to see the water I'm swimming in, to see that, yeah, that is how it works actually. And how
Yeah.
strange. And just supposing that actually productivity culture was just something that was just a screen, a veil that was put across life for now, so that we all tend to think in that way. Not all of us, obviously, because plenty of people don't. But certain sort of overachieving person sees themselves that way. And actually, when we die, we'll be shown that no, that was never about that. It wasn't about that. It was about the small acts of kindness you did. It was about the stuff you don't even know you didn't even know you did. It was just that's what it was about, really. And you
I
were
think that
away by
is what
that.
it's about. Yeah, but it's so difficult when you're in it, when you're in
Mm.
it, and particularly when you're someone who you want to do something of service, you want to make a difference in the world. And it's one of my greatest life lessons to understand that I'm not maybe the best judge of whether I'm doing that. I'm not maybe the best judge of what is the thing that's going to be the thing that makes the difference, and living in that flow. In my younger days, I did do a lot of activist work, especially at university. I was very, very involved in different projects, and I started projects and so on. And I was very self-consciously a do-gooder. I identified as that, and I thought that was how it had to happen, and that was important, and that was the only way. And then, well, I suppose I had children, and I realized that I didn't have time for anything else. But yeah, that's a learning, and I come back to again this idea that if you feel that impulse to step out of your life, your family, your world, and to do something in the collective, in the community, and that's a real for you, then by all means find something that's aligned, just as you have done, something that's so unique and aligned to you because you grew up wanting to garden and loving food and gardening and that whole process. So it's a natural thing. And I would say to anyone listening, if you feel that impulse, wonderful, but it will be something that will be just an extension of who you are. It won't be an exception to the rule necessarily. It'll be just an extension of your interests, your passions, your skills. I think that's where we're most of use, when we can combine those things usefully. Yeah, that's
Yes, I think individual. There's a quote, and is it Goethe? Something like, find the one thing that you can do that nobody else can do. Go with that, and we all have it. That place of that. It's like, that our hearts most wish, most want, and that's the
mm,
spark. And for me, it was the sort of gardening and the food system, but it could be anything. It could be music. It could be engineering. It accountancy. Whatever it is. But it's our unique flowering that we bring to life,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's
beautiful.
that's what that's what we're here for, to be ourselves and to express the little bit of life that's in us. The life that's in me is completely unique and special and wonderful, and so is the life in every other person, unique and
Absolutely.
special, and it's a shared experience, and we have so much we can learn from sharing our paths with other people, finding companionship, um, finding people who share our values.
Yeah.
So and for me, that's been the work on food, but it doesn't have to be that, does it? It's the
Mm,
spark that drives us, and
yeah,
our task in life is to find expression for that in
absolutely.
whatever way that
Yeah,
that we can, and to see it as being like our gift to the world, not a sort of an ego inflated preciousness. Like, I have a gift for the world, but this is I had this life. Many people contributed to my upbringing, and they all fed me and watered me and educated me, and so much has been given to me. And then I sort of feel like, yes, and this is what I've done with all of that. Is this is what I've learned, and I want to offer that back. So
mm,
there's a humility and an exchange to it.
so beautifully put, so beautifully put. And it all comes back to that togetherness and the collective and the community. And that's what I'm going to take from this conversation, is the importance of connecting with other people through being yourself and through your gifts and through however it is that you uniquely serve. But that connection piece of it is so important, which is why I love doing this podcast, because I connect with so many amazing people such as yourself. It's just such a pleasure to know and meet people. Well, thank you so much for joining
And
me for
you,
this
and
conversation.
you.
It's been lovely. And yeah, thank you. I will put in the show notes a link to some of your articles if you are happy to share. some of the work you're doing if people are curious about the projects you're involved in.
It's been a pleasure, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you.